Histamines are signaling molecules of the immune system, which can be inflammatory. So if you currently have a high level of inflammation in your system, then consumption of a high dietary intake of histamine can actually make you more inflamed and can flare reflux. It was a clinical trial, albeit small, 8 patients who had GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, and IBS. But here's what's interesting. They were given either a high FODMAP or a low FODMAP diet. They found that the high FODMAP diet led to worse reflux. Foods that are high in FODMAPs are certain fruits and vegetables that are rich in prebiotics that feed bacteria. Probiotics are the bacteria, prebiotics feed the bacteria. And so the low FODMAP diet that restricted prebiotics and therefore didn't feed bacteria had improvements in reflux. So what does this tell us? Well, firstly, that a diet that is mindful of if someone has bacterial overgrowth is important to keep in mind when people have things like reflux. But it also ties to gluten. How? Because gluten is high in FODMAPs. And I've had a growing suspicion that when people experience benefits from going gluten-free, it may be because they're reducing FODMAPs in their diet, and it's not necessarily that they have an allergy to gluten. In fact, I want to thank Dr. Michael Camilleri, who is a gastroenterologist and researcher at Mayo Clinic, for recommending a hopefully future podcast guest who is one of the preeminent researchers in non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So keep an eye out for this interview. But Michael's comment to me was that this researcher suspects that there's a fair subset of people who have gluten reactivity wherein it's the FODMAPs and not actually the antigenicity or the inflammatory reaction to the gluten. Why does this matter? Because FODMAP reactivity tends to be temporary, meaning if you improve your gut health by going on a low FODMAP diet, as just one example, things balance. We know that a low FODMAP diet starves overgrowths and has been shown to reduce SIBO gas levels, so small intestinal bacterial overgrowth gas levels reduce. And then people can very successfully reintroduce these foods at a later date and have good tolerance. So why this whole thing matters is if you're in the paradigm of, if I remove gluten and I feel better, that means permanent gluten reactivity. That is usually, in my opinion, and the data here are still being mapped out, but that is usually incorrect because there appears to be much more prevalence of FODMAP intolerance than there is gluten intolerance. Now, to clarify my position here, I'm not saying that if you've gone off gluten and you feel better, that that's invalid. But what I'm trying to help you to see, or potentially see, is that may have been due to a FODMAP restriction, which can correct imbalances in the microbiota and then allow you to enjoy gluten at a later date. And the overarching reason why I share this is a growing concern I have that people are becoming afraid of food. If you don't like grains, if you feel that grains are bad and no one should eat them, that's your prerogative, that's fine. I don't think that's what the data generally support. But what I'd like at very minimum for you to have is the freedom when you're at a restaurant or a dinner party or a wedding or what have you, to be able to have some pasta, a slice of pizza, some bread, some crackers, whatever it is, at very least to equip you with really the data that can help you to see that the reactivity might be FODMAPs and not permanent. And again, at bare minimum, you have the food freedom and not food fear. So anyway, moving on to another intervention that can be helpful for reflux. Fasting, 2023 clinical trial, again, kind of small, 25 participants. They consolidated their eating to an 8-hour window. And what they found was that after 2 days of intermittent fasting, they had improved reflux and improved heartburn. And to quote the researchers, our data shows that short intermittent fasting improves symptoms of both regurgitation and heartburn. A simple tool you can use, an 8-hour feeding window is not super hard. It's not a multiple day fast. So it's something for a couple days, in this case 2 days, could be helpful in reducing inflammation and improving your reflux. And by the way, if this has been helpful, please comment and subscribe. This really does help us reach more people who are trying to improve their health, so it is quite deeply appreciated. Histamines are signaling molecules of the immune system, which can be inflammatory. So if you currently have a high level of inflammation in your system, then consumption of a high dietary intake of histamine can actually make you more inflamed and can flare reflux. So again, a 1 to 2 month rehab plan, if you will, of avoidance can be helpful. Here are some of the most commonly consumed high histamine foods that you want to therefore avoid. Fermented foods, and these are, I think, very healthy and very good to include in your diet, fermented foods, but for some people, short-term rehab can be helpful or avoidance. So this would be your sauerkraut, your kimchi, your kombuchas. Additionally, aged cheeses, cured meats like jerkies, fish and seafood, even though can be very healthy. Again, short-term corrective avoidance. Alcohol, probably not going to help anything. Vinegar and other vinegar-rich foods. Certain vegetables, tomatoes and spinach. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's just giving you some of the more common ones. Fruits, avocado, citrus, strawberry, and banana. Soy products, and finally, leftovers. Anything that's been over 24 hours is probably accruing a decent amount of histamine, so do your best to avoid leftovers past roughly the 24-hour mark. Curcumin, this anti-inflammatory spice, and in this trial, 15 patients with dyspepsia, so indigestion. I'm sorry, this was 151 patients, so it's an even better sample size. They compared omeprazole, aka Prilosec, against curcumin, and they found equivalency in the outcomes, which in my mind is absolutely amazing. So instead of using omeprazole and suppressing acid, which can have some deleterious benefits, I do think acid suppression in the short term is justifiable. Is it ideal? No. Is it justifiable? Yes. You have a different option of curcumin at a dose of 1 gram per day. And that has been shown, again, from this trial to be equivalent. This led the researchers to comment as follows, quote, curcumin and omeprazole had comparable efficacy for improving dyspepsia. So fantastic news. Growing evidence for natural medicines, in this case, curcumin and its efficacy for reflux. Part of what's happening underneath the hood with curcumin, as I mentioned a moment ago, is its anti-inflammatory action. Now, specifically, if we want to get a little bit down into the weeds, curcumin, amongst other mechanisms, suppresses a pathway known as NF-kappa B. This is an inflammatory pathway, and the expression of NF-kappa B can lead to inflammation, and the suppression of NF-kappa B, which curcumin does, can reduce inflammation and therefore improve reflux. A 2010 clinical trial found that melatonin, when compared to, again, omeprazole, and the melatonin was 3 milligrams at bedtime because it can help with sleep, so we don't want to take it during the day. Now, both groups had improvements in heartburn and some of the pain that is associated with GERD, but only, key point here, the melatonin group had improvements in lower esophageal tone. So more and more data showing us that there's a better path than omeprazole. Pairing curcumin and melatonin seems to make a lot of sense because it's going to have multiple benefits. By the way, melatonin is also a fairly powerful antioxidant. So the curcumin can help with reflux and with things like joint pain. The melatonin can improve sleep. It's an antioxidant and will also improve lower esophageal sphincter tone. I would combine that also with some formula that's aimed at repairing the lining of the gut. The one that we've developed and I'm very proud of because the flavor profile and the efficacy is quite good is Gut Rebuild Nutrients. There's a number of ingredients here: vitamin A, zinc, glutamine, N-acetylglucosamine, DGL, aloe vera. DGL, as one example, in a recent clinical trial was found to be more effective than antacids, yet again. Probiotics have been shown to improve GERD, to reduce inflammation, to reduce leaky gut, to combat SIBO, H. pylori, and fungus, and also lower levels of histamine. Looking at a 2020 systematic review, 79% of the studies reviewed found that probiotics improved GERD. Quoting, in conclusion, probiotic use can be beneficial for GERD symptoms such as regurgitation and heartburn. What you see in the research here is most of the studies have examined the type of probiotic we call a blend of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. This is kind of your traditional probiotic. For this type of probiotic, and on the label, you're going to be looking for predominantly lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, anywhere between usually 8 to 15 different species at a dose of 1 to 50 billion per day. A little higher is fine, but that's the general dose range for about 2 months. Now, to have the strongest probiotic, our hypothesis is you want to combine the 3 formula types together so as to have, we call it the triple therapy probiotic. So you combine this with Saccharomyces either boulardii or cerevisiae, and you'll see the dosing here listed, but essentially 10 to 15 billion or 4 to 8 billion for 2 to 3 months. And then finally, a soil-based probiotic. This will have various bacillus species in the formula at a dose of 2 to 6 billion, again, for 2, maybe 3 months. Now, it's probably fairly obvious that there's a connection between stress and digestive function, or said another way, the brain and digestive function. So if you're someone who notices you have sensitive digestion, your bowels are irritable as an IBS, you don't do well with, let's say, dairy or carbs, or you're quick to experience reflux, or you have supplement reactivity, or inflammatory bowel disease, or pain, or constipation. There's varying levels of research suggesting imbalances and dysfunction in that parasympathetic chain, or the vagus nerve, are what, at least in part, underlies these conditions. And we do have, I think most importantly, interventional data showing us that vagal nerve stimulation can help with all of these conditions. One observational study of over 12,000 individuals found that people with moderate to high stress levels had a 2 times greater risk of GERD. Quoting, individuals exposed to higher levels of stress are more likely to have GERD symptoms. Therefore, stress reduction should be an important part of GERD symptom management. One study looked at GERD patients, and they found that the heart rate variability when measured over 24 hours, heart rate variability, or HRV, is a proxy for stress levels. The higher your heart rate variability, the healthier your stress response. The lower it is, the worse. So quoting from these researchers, patients with GERD have distortion of sympathetic and parasympathetic components of the autonomic nervous system. So there are 2 ways this can be applied: carotid, or over the neck, or alternatively in the ear, what's known as auricular. My recommendation would be using an auricular or ear, essentially a headphone application device. What we've been recommending at the clinic is a product known as the VaguStim. Simple headphone, it's easy to use. As you can see from this photo here, it is inexpensive, and I favor this over other options, which are mainly the carotid or over the neck. I find the research regarding the auricular more compelling. There's a broader swath of conditions that have been studied. And also, and this is just more so my bias, but if we're trying to retrain your nervous system and some of these key regulatory centers in the brain, like the amygdala and the hippocampus, I just don't think you're going to have a retraining effect in a short treatment duration as you see with the neck application, which is usually about 2 minutes per treatment. The trend you see in a lot of therapies for the nervous system is you want to have a lower amplitude of stimulus over a longer period of time. That's just sort of my interpretation. I can't say there's been a comparative, to my knowledge, there has not been a comparative study, but all that to say, my recommendation would be the headphone or auricular application, easy, not expensive, And I think it'll probably have a better impact on attuning the nervous system in that direction of being parasympathetic that we're trying to target. Now, let's discuss some of the very exciting research regarding how devices like the VaguStim can help balance the brain and shift you more parasympathetic. These vagal nerve stimulating devices have been shown to increase the function of the vagus nerve, which through their cholinergic pathways are strongly anti-inflammatory. Alrighty, well, let me know what you think in the comments. Pose any questions there. This is Dr. Ruscio. I hope this helps, and I'll talk to you next time.